All right, I'm going to start this off. I'm Mike Swisler with the Tessman Company. We are doing a webinar on Alliance G2 Polymeric Sand and Alliance Gator Base. Keith Emke will be our presenter. He is a graduate of University of Wisconsin-Madison and landscape architect, and he's a recovering landscape contractor. He spent the better part of 30 years working for two top landscape contracting firms in Wisconsin. He designed, sold, and supervised the construction and grading, drainage, retaining walls, paving, water features, masonry features, landscape carpentry, low voltage lighting, plants, and turf. Now working for Alliance Designer Products located in Minneapolis. He's a territory manager for the upper Midwest and Central Canada. He enjoys troubleshooting, educational aspect of what he does. He looks forward to helping people involved in landscaping industry raise their profile and level of professionalism. All right, Keith, it's on you, buddy.
All right, thanks, Mike. So like Mike said, I'm a recovering landscape contractor. Today we're going to talk about polymeric sand, and we're also going to talk about our product called Gator Base, which actually will replace 6 inches of crushed stone underneath the patio or walkway. I'm going to go through the polymeric sand, and then we'll get into the Gator Base, and then we'll follow up at the end with questions. If you folks have questions, I believe you have an opportunity to type them in, and when we get to the end, Mike will read off any questions that were submitted and see if I can get you an answer. So we'll get started with polymeric sand. We're going to go through the advantages, the nature of polymers. Our newest product is called G2, and the difference that G2 has over other polymeric sands, how to install it, homework, and common issues that I see. So when we look at polymeric sand, Mike mentioned that I'm a territory manager, so I deal with the entire state of Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Western Iowa, and the provinces in Canada of Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. And I would say people are fairly consistent in terms of what I see across the board in the industry. There are still contractors out there that are not using polymeric sand. They're using a concrete sand or a mason sand or granite grindings, things like that. But polymeric sand does have its advantages. It stays in place once you put it in and it's installed properly. It's going to improve the paver interlock, so the entire system is locked in together. You don't have any individual pieces. It all acts as one big monolithic piece. It's going to limit weeds and ant activity, and also color availability. When you're using a basic sand, you have one color. In our product, we have up to 4 colors available in our G2 Gator Max. So there are a lot of new pavers that are coming on the market that, maybe beige isn't the best look with a deep black paver or with a white paver. So we have different colors that are available. So when we look at polymers in general, the nature of polymers is that they're water absorbing particles, and when they absorb water, they expand. It's important to realize that polymers are not mortar. They're not going to get as hard as mortar. When they absorb water, they expand and they get soft. As they dry out, they release water and they shrink and get hardened up. And polymers are going to work best within the vertical walls of the paver joint. If you remember, and if we can keep it within the vertical walls, that's going to actually strengthen the bond of the polymers in the joint. If you remember when you're kids, I don't know if anyone did this, but you'd walk into a door jamb and you'd put your arms out, your forearms out against the sides of the door, and you'd press outwards for a count of 5, and then you step forward and your arms would rise up automatically. That's kind of what happens with polymers, the same principle. If we can restrict their growth, it actually is going to make them stronger. So much like when you're restricting the growth of your arms, when you're in a door jamb and when you step out, the pressure causes your arms to raise up. Like I said, it's kind of the same concept as the polymers. And also kind of the same concept as a souffle. If we don't restrict their growth, the polymers can continue to grow and grow and grow until they get to the point where they actually collapse under their own weight. And then we have loose, chunky, friable sand on top of the pavers that is tracking all over the place. So the key to polymeric sand is to restrict their growth. It also has to be allowed to dry out completely. Once you activate the polymeric sand with water, you want it to dry out, and then that sets the polymeric life cycle into effect. So it can go through a life cycle of expanding and contracting and not have issues. If it's not allowed to dry out completely, we're going to have some issues with it at some point. So G2 is a newer product that we actually released back in October of 2017. In 2018, we released an improved version at no additional cost or anything like that, but we'll get into this product. So G2 is a different kind of sand. What we've done is we've refined the gradation of the sand, so we've taken out a majority of the smaller particulate. As a result, there's no dust. Now, and all the marketing says no dust. I put an asterisk on this because there is a little dust. We'll get into that later on, but it's a much cleaner mix of sand that's in the bag. There's no haze because the polymers that we used to use, which were opaque polymers, are now translucent. So we don't have any white hazing with this product. All the polymers are clear. We say that on the bag that you don't need a blower. It sweeps very clean. If and I have an asterisk on this one as well. We'll get into that way later on. It does sweep fairly clean, but we'll get into that. And with this one, the beauty of this one is we're not doing the 3-step watering process. We're only doing one watering. It's a little bit longer than what you're used to, but you're not having to water 3 different times. So when we came out with G2, it had all those features in it, and at that point, it was a 60-minute rain-safe product. As of October of 2018, we released an improved version of the G2 that is now 15 minutes rain-safe. So some vendors may not have this in stock yet. They're working through their stock of the initial version of G2, but our G2, the improved version with the rapid set technology, will have this red sticker on the bag, and it is 15 minutes rain safe. It's also OSHA compliant. So OSHA in 2000, I think went into effect in early 2018. They had standards that we had to meet in terms of airborne particulates, airborne silicates. We hired a landscape company to pour, sweep, and install polymeric sands in a number of different paving situations, and they were fitted with respiratory monitors. And after an 8-hour day of working with our polymeric sands, the measurements were taken, and the results were that the airborne silicates were less than 50% of what OSHA will allow as part of their regulation. Also, our sands, our polymeric sands, meet the ASTM C144 standard for jointing sand. There are companies out there whose sand does not meet this. So if you're on a project where they are going to be testing, or you have to meet certain standards for polymeric sands or jointing sands, ours will meet that ASTM standard. So when we look at G2, a lot of people think G2 is just a polymeric sand unto itself. And it's actually an improvement on 2 of our best-selling sands. So for years, we made a product called Super Sand. It came in a yellow bag, much like you see here. And it was good for joints up to 1 inch, residential projects. But with the G2 technology added to the Super Sand, it increased the size of the width of a joint that it was capable of spanning up to 2 inches. It's still good for residential projects. It's not a super heavy duty sand. It'll set at 32 degrees or warmer, and it is rain safe in 15 minutes. This sand is a good basic polymeric sand, patios, sidewalks, nothing too heavy. It is available in beige and slate gray. We also apply the G2 technology to our Gator Max. So our Gator Max prior to G2 would be good spanning joints up to 2 inches. With the G2 technology, this now allows us to span joints up to 4 inches, although I would question my contractor if we had 4-inch joints in the patio, just a personal opinion. This is a more robust version of Super Sand. It was actually developed for overlay applications. So if you go out east to New Jersey, Connecticut, New York, Long Island, majority of the contractors out there are not putting pavers on a sand bed or a crushed stone and sand bed. They're putting pavers on a concrete slab. And a concrete slab, it has certain drainage components in it. You have to pitch, you have certain pitch requirements. So when we say it's an overlay application, it isn't as simple as I've got a concrete slab, I'm putting the pavers on top of it. There are certain specifications that would have to be met in order for this to qualify to be used in an overlay application. You could always, maybe when we get finished, Mike could maybe, if you have any questions, you can get a hold of Mike and we could talk about what I would consider an overlay application. But this was developed for those situations where we were having issues with polymeric sands not setting up because of poor drainage in the overlay application. So this is a product you can use in overlay and non-overlay applications. Like I said, it's a more robust version. So residential, commercial projects, industrial, street use, driveways, things like that. This is a good default sand. It pretty much covers everything. You could use it in flagstone, pavers, you name it. It's rain safe in 15 minutes in a non-overlay situation. Rain safe in 24 hours if you're using it on top of concrete. It sets at 32 degrees or warmer, and this is going to come in 4 colors. So you got beige and slate gray, and the colors are going to be identical from product to product. So if you look at the Super Sand versus the G2 in the beige and the slate gray, they're going to be identical. We also make an ivory. We also have a jet. It's a deep, dark black diamond. One thing to notice is the black diamond is going to cover a little bit less per bag than the beige, the slate gray, the ivory. It's a different material. It's black granite. It weighs more, so a 50-pound bag doesn't get you as far. So, and we've got things on our website that would help you out and tell you about the coverage. So in terms of installation, we always want to plan ahead. First, you got to make sure that the irrigation system is off. Alert the homeowner so they're not watering plants or the lawn around the paved area that's going to go in. And when we put it in, we want to, and I screwed up enough polymeric sand jobs on my own to, so I try to approach this whole webinar as a contractor. What does a contractor want to know? I'm not going to sell you I'm not here to tell you all the rainbows and unicorns and how great this stuff is. Our products do have limitations. They do have their applications, and I'll try to give you alternatives in areas where I think maybe this wouldn't be the best product. So first thing we want to do is limit how many bags are opened. It might sound basic, but I run into contractors all the time that we were going to use 15 bags, and they cut open 15 bags, and they end up using 12, and now you got 3 open bags that would be tough to reuse. So limit how many bags are open, and then spread the sand in a gunpowder trail, much like Yosemite Sam would do, right? You don't want to pour the sand into one big pile and then try to move that pile across the paving surface. So do it in a gunpowder trail. And to limit waste, when you want to work in smaller areas, again, you don't want to have to move that pile across the whole paved area. And the easiest way to move it is with a hard bristled street broom. If you're using a real fine bristle broom, it's going to take a lot more effort to move that sand. And at this point, it's just, we're trying to rough it in. We're not, this isn't a finished product yet. And make sure you don't use any fillers. Every once in a while, I'll run into somebody that's putting granite sand in or some kind of chip or something to fill up the sand. Hey, we were putting in 3-inch thick pavers. We didn't want to put in 3 inches of sand, polymeric sand, so we put in a filler. You're going to waste more time dicking around trying to make sure that the fillers are at a consistent height than you are in putting in the sand. So don't use anything other than the polymeric sand in those joints. Once you've got the joint roughed in with the sand, you want to consolidate the joint sand with a plate compactor or something else. This is something that's really gaining in popularity. I think it's a great piece of equipment. I wish I sold them. It's called a paver rolling compactor. A traditional plate compactor has an oscillator inside the unit that generates and directs the force that's generated. And on a plate compactor, the force that's generated is forced downward into the ground to pound the ground. But as you get into flagstone, larger profile pavers, concrete pavers, porcelain tile, things like that, where a lot of contractors don't want to use a plate compactor for fear of breaking the pavers, or even like a wet cast, where you might do some damage to the surface of the paver. This paver rolling compactor is a great piece of equipment. It's expensive. It's probably a $4,000 or $5,000 piece of equipment, But I find rental companies all over the place do carry them. A lot of stone yards are going to carry them. The oscillator inside this unit is oriented at 90 degrees so that the force that's generated is actually thrown out laterally. It's not thrown down to the ground. So all you're doing is vibrating or shaking the pavers to get the sand to settle down in the joints, and it does no damage to the surface, and it's very easy to operate. It's like pushing a lawnmower. You know, with a plate compactor, you're kind of subject to going in straight lines. With this, just allows you to be much more freewheeling in where you're going to compact. So once we're consolidating it, we want to repeat the steps. We tell folks with our G2 to go across it 3 different times in 3 directions. Once you've gone through and consolidated the joint sand, now we want to clean out the bulk of the excess with a hard bristle broom. Again, a fine bristle broom is a finishing step, and this is 1 step before that. So we're going to use a hard bristle broom to remove a bulk of the sand, and then use a soft bristle broom to finish it up. Get all the sand off the surface of the pavers. We want to make sure that the sand is at least 1/8 of an inch below the shoulder or chamfer of the paver, and we'll get into that in a little bit. Once we have the joints all set with the sand, we're going to activate the polymers with water. We always want to start at the lowest point of the paved area and work our way uphill. Set your nozzle on a shower. We're not using a mist at this point. We're using a shower on our hose end sprayer. And we're working in smaller areas. I mentioned before, and if you've used polymeric sand, a lot of companies, including ours, was a 3-step watering process. Some have a 2-step watering process, but this is this is a 1-step watering process. So we're actually saturating in smaller areas as opposed to broadcasting or missing over a large area and then going and having a cigarette and coming back and hitting it again and giving it a break and coming back again. So I mentioned 2 asterisks on the when I began this. So when we get to having no dust, it does have a little bit of dust. And if you watch these guys, the dust that pops out of the bottom of the compactor, it does get up to maybe the top of that guy's boots, but it sits right back down again. So to say it has no dust, you know, I get guys that are trying to bust me on it all the time. Hey, your stuff does have dust. It's got a little bit of dust, but typically in a situation like this, you would see these guys walk around in a haze of dust, which just isn't the case. And you're not missing anything here in sound. All right, we'll go to the next one. We also say that you don't need a blower. I recommend every contractor that I talk to, you got a blower in the truck or the trailer, pull it out. I would blow before you water, and I would blow after you water. If you're putting in a rather smooth surface paver, Holland paver, you probably don't need a blower. But when you're looking at something like this, that's got a heavy texture to it, and you don't do a good job of removing the sand from the surface, what you're going to have left is something like this. Now, this is with an older polymer that's opaque, so that it gets a hazing. With the G2, all the polymers are translucent, so you wouldn't have this milkiness. They actually, all the bottoms of all the texture would actually be shiny. So when you're dealing with a heavier textured paver, use a blower. As much as our marketing people say this is great, you don't need a blower. I'm a pragmatist. I'm a former contractor. You got one there. I say use it. Now, I mentioned too that polymeric sand does have its applications. Is it always the best option? Not necessarily. So you got to do maybe you got to do a little recon before you get involved on the project, before your crew's out there. If you're in a situation with constant moisture, a high water table, irrigation heads over that are broadcasting over the paved area, if the patio is below a retaining wall that where water might be leaching through the retaining wall and onto the paving, maybe this isn't the best area, because polymers and moss don't play well together. Moss is going to get in to the polymers and actually will eat up the polymers. And if you ever decide, the client says, hey, I want you to pull all this moss out, when you pull out all that moss, all you're going to have left is just loose sand. So polymers and moss, not the best combination. You also want to look at your paving location. So where it's going to be constantly beat up by concentrated water, maybe polymeric sand isn't the best option. So this picture I took underneath a deck, and you can see all the all the the buildup of sand where it has been eroded out of the joints because of the concentrated water falling between the deck boards. This project doesn't have a gutter on over the sidewalk, and you can see how it wore away. So this, again, isn't the best situation for polymeric sand. Now, the contractor could have waited till the gutter was put on, or in the previous photo, they do make a baffle rain evacuation system for underneath decks, so you don't have those issues. But your options would be maybe putting in a joint stabilizing sealer. So you put the sand in the joints and then sealing the joints with a high acrylic content sealer. Acrylics are impervious to water, and we don't have an issue. And I do, if you're putting in concrete pavers or even natural stone, I do recommend that you seal them to some degree just to protect the stone or the pavers themselves. So a joint stabilizing sealer might be an option if polymeric sand is not. You can look at rock bond. So I use this product. This is an epoxy that we mix with a clean washed stone and then trowel it into place. If you look at the label on the bottle, it's used a lot in flagstone applications. So again, this is something, it's epoxy, it's impervious to water, it's not an issue, and it's permeable. You also might think of backer rod and Vulcum. This is a trick I used to use quite a bit, where going back to the photo underneath the gutter, and hey, this is jobs up north, we don't put gutters up here. Then in that joint, I would put in the backer rod and into the joint, cover it with 1/4 inch, 3/8 of an inch of Vulcum, and then maybe sprinkle the same sand on top of the wet caulk to make it look like the rest of the joints. You also might consider functional accents. So going back to where the rain coming out where there was no gutter, maybe they put a limestone stripe down the middle of it, limit the joints that could be exposed, that are exposed, and make it a functional accent, a decorative accent. And you also might consider, maybe this is an area where we could put in some type of permeable paver. So 3 common issues that I see. So I'm the guy that gets a phone call, hey, your sand failed, come on out here, take a look at this, what are you gonna do about it? Polymeric sands are the offensive line of the paver system. When they're doing their job and they were installed properly, they're doing a job, no one really even notices them. But when they're not doing a job, when there's a mistake made, it's often quite glaring and causes the whole paver system to break down. So when I get called out to projects, I can usually narrow it down to one of or a combination of 3 different things that I noticed that were installed incorrectly on the installation. So the first thing is a joint height. So when you look at this photo, in the sand or in the red circle, the sand is too high. It's sitting, this is a chamfered paver, and it's sitting up in the chamfer. The area in the blue, all that sand has actually chipped away. If you recall the picture of the souffle that I had. So this is where an area, when sand is in the chamfer, that's in an area where the sand is allowed to expand and not controlling we can't control its growth in that chamfer, and as a result, it overexpands, collapses under its own weight, and then just chips away. So the joint height is key. So when you look at this, where that red line is, the bottom of the red line should be the top of the joint sand. All too often, I see guys that have that sand filled in all the way to the bottom of the ruler. And it's an issue when you have it to the bottom of the ruler. It expands upwards, collapses under its own weight, and then we have problems. Joint sand is not made to be in that chamfer. Joint sand is made to be in the vertical walls of the joint. Now, when you look at this stuff, so this is a Unilock product, quartz stone, and quite often I see where you can't even see the shoulders of these pavers. This is a proper installation of the G2 sand in a paver application like this. So you can consider these as maybe as flagstone too. At some points, you might be 3/8 to a 1/2 inch below the height of the paver in terms of the height of the joint sand. So it might be quite drastic. But when you get sand that sits too high, it can overexpand. It can actually, when it expands, it can actually envelop the edges of the flagstone or the edges of the quartz stone here, and that becomes a weak point, and that's where we have failures. The second thing I see is consolidation or lack thereof. So once again, getting back to proper consolidation, a lot of pavers with wider joints. Guys think, well, you know, I don't have to squeeze the sand down to the real tight joints. These are wider joints. The sand just falls in. Gravity works, no problem. Which is a misnomer. Even more so, you need to consolidate in those situations. You're losing 50%. After you compact, those joints should drop at least 30%. And if you don't, not enough product is getting into the joints. If you recall, when I started, I said that we removed a majority of the smaller particulate out of the G2 mix. So all you're left with is fairly even-sized grains of sand in the polymers themselves. With all the smaller particulate having been removed, we have larger air gaps. We need the sand and the polymers to be in close contact with each other in order to work properly. So compaction is a vital part of the installation process. And watering. When watering, this is probably the biggest thing I see is guys don't do the watering properly. A lot of guys didn't read the bag. They're still doing the old 3-step watering process. I run into guys that are using the old thumb nozzle on the end of the hose, guys using the mist setting on their hose end sprayer, guys using an oscillating sprinkler to water, guys using soaker hoses to water. I have this nozzle. This nozzle here is a Melnor. I paid 10 or 12 bucks for it at Home Depot. It's cast aluminum. It's got a shower setting on it, and I keep it in my truck. It doesn't find its way into the bucket of the skid loader. It's not on the floor of the trailer. It's not necessarily a precision piece of equipment, but it's a necessary piece of equipment. And it's not that big an investment to go get a decent nozzle, something like this. So inconsistent watering is the biggest thing I see. What we're recommending for G2 projects is we're going to cover 30 square feet for 30 seconds. As I mentioned at the beginning, you're going to start at the bottom of the slope. And sometimes I'll make it real basic. I've got safety cones where I'll lay out 4 safety cones, and I'll have one of the contractor's people there with me. He's got his watch or his cell phone. All right, this is 30 square feet. You know, I'm going to start watering. Give me 30 seconds. And I water, and he tells me when 30 seconds is up, and we move on to the next 30 square feet. That's what we recommend for watering. One time, 30 square feet, 30 seconds, add a shower. And foam is not a problem. A lot of guys, when they see foam, all right, we got to stop watering because that's the polymers. The foam is actually just a byproduct of a detergent that is put into the mix with the polymers and the sand. It's what we call a surfactant. It helps lubricate all the particles together so that water is able to move better down through the joint profile. The grains of sand are not going to get hung up on each other. So it's actually a lubricant, and it helps get the water down to the base of the paver. I demoed G2 Rapid Set for people last fall and early this spring, and virtually every time that I did the demo, I had full penetration of water for the entire depth of the Holland pavers that I was using. And even though I had foam, the foam will dry transparent or leave no residue. Foam is not a deterrent to watering. If you see foam, keep going to the 30 seconds is done. So now we're going to go to, this is out in Nebraska last summer. We were demoing the G2. I just want you to see how much water we're actually putting down. So we're not shy about the water. Don't be afraid of the water. Just watch Craig now. He ends up doing more than 30 seconds on this because we got wider joints with the flagstone. But you can see he's not shy about how much water we're putting down. As long as you've got the joints recessed, you know, the joints are down, that creates actually a reservoir for water to sit in before it runs off. Should not have any issues with it. So we'll move on from that. Bonus package. So there's a couple of notes here. You don't want to create a pool. We want to make sure that the surface is free draining. Make sure it's pitched. This is a project that I took pictures of. It was roughly level, and they also put solid edging, like a bed edging around the perimeter that was about 1 inch high, and all the outer 8 inch perimeter of the patio was all real soupy polymeric sand. It never had a chance to dry out. So you don't want to create a pool. You also don't want to necessarily push the envelope. I said that this stuff will set up at 32 degrees or warmer. That's taking into account nighttime temperatures. I'll get guys around Thanksgiving calling me, hey, it's going to be 32 today. Can we put the sand in? You could. At that point, I might recommend just putting some mason sand in or torpedo sand in, dig it through the winter, come back in spring, vacuum it out, and put in polymeric sand. A lot of times pushing the envelope on it may result in a failure. And storage. Our bags, so this is our facility in Montreal. I took this photo in December of 17. We had thousands of pallets that are sitting out in the snow and the cold. Our bags, technically they're waterproof, but they do have 2 holes at the top, and they're vent holes, and it helps for air to work its way out of the package as we're filling the bag with the sand. If the holes weren't there to allow the air out, we'd actually be trying to stack balloons, and so all the air gets moved out of the bags with those holes, but they are somewhat waterproof. So if you're perfectly fine storing this product outside as long as it's covered. It comes from the factory with 3 wraps, plastic, shrink wrap, and then more plastic. Once you break open that seal, though, I would make sure you cover it back up or move it inside, because it is possible for water to move in. If it's sitting, if you got water sitting on top of the bags, it is possible for water to work its way into the bags. So, but if they're unbreached, they're perfectly fine sitting outside. So that's the rundown on our G2 sands. Now I'm going to get into a little bit of, we'll talk about Gator Base. So Gator Base is a product that's going to take the place of 6 inches of crushed stone underneath a patio or walkway. As a result, you're going to have less excavation. We're going to greatly reduce your labor, and you'll have superior freeze-thaw protection. So if you look at the profiles here, you can see the Gator Base on the left side, directly underneath the paver, and how it's equivalent to the 6 inches of crushed stone. And I don't think we're getting any audio with this, and I apologize for that. This is, if you go to YouTube and you type in Gator Base, this video will be the first thing that should pop up. It's a side-by-side comparison video, time-lapse video showing Gator Base versus a traditional stone-based patio. And it goes through rather quickly, and you can see the progress on the Gator Base patio versus the progress on the traditional stone-based patio. So as they finish up on the Gator Base patio, there'll be a list that pops up on the screen showing everything that's left to do on the traditional stone-based patio. So there's your time comparison. It came in 57% faster. Now this is a contractor who did this for us, who puts in, I would say, 15 to 20 jobs per year. Not every project is Gator Base, but his crews are really good at putting it in, but this is a fairly basic installation. So you can see all the things that have to be done yet on that traditional base. So about Gator Base, this isn't something that we just came up with a couple of years ago. The origin of the idea for this product actually comes from Norway in the early 70s. Road engineers were having difficulty with the soils they have to deal with there for underneath roads. So what they started doing is they started specifying thick layers of styrofoam for use in road-based material. So this is a rather recent picture. So this technology is not new. It's just a remedy for poor soils. If you go down to, so this is a bridge abutment. If you go down to the Gulf states along the Gulf of Mexico, this is technology they're still using underneath their roads. So this is a fairly prevalent way to remedy poor soils. The material itself, it's code 5, high density polypropylene. It's 3/4 of an inch thick. It's 24 inches wide, 36 inches long. It doesn't quite come out to 6 square feet per piece because we do have locking edges on it. So it actually comes out 5.79 square feet per piece. But it does have locking edges on all 4 sides. It's got drainage components. So every 16 square inches, there's 5 drainage holes, and each drainage hole has 4 pre-sloped, not ramps, pre-sloped, I can't think of the word, that lead to them to get water, to evacuate water out. Applications, the original concept in marketing this product was areas that were limited on access. So if you've got a gate that you can't get through, or a fence, or a retaining wall, or a masonry wall that I can't get a machine through, staircase, I can't get a machine up and down the staircase, that's our only access. If you're limited on storage, you have no place to store the spoils coming out or the stone going in. If you're under limited disturbance, so let's say you're along a waterway and you're under permit, you can only disturb X number of cubic yards of soil. This, since you're doing less than half the excavation, this might allow you to put in a bigger patio and still be within the confines of a patio, of the permit. Slopes, you got a slope you don't want to have to navigate with your equipment. If you've got a mature site with large trees and you don't want to dig down 10, 12 inches into the root system, now you're only going to be going down 4 inches. If you've got underground utilities in the area where you're going to be doing the paving, again, this might conflict with your traditional excavation, whereas if we're using Gator base, might not. Installation is rather easy. In terms of the depth of the excavation, you take your paver height, plus your bedding course, plus your Gator base. Now, all of our testing was done with a 1/2 inch of sand. So we typically figure you got about 4 inches of paving. So the photo shows guys using a shovel. I know there are contractors out there that are using sod cutters, where they'll make a pass, remove the sod, come back, make another pass, and they're probably pretty close to 4 inches. You want to extend the excavation 6 inches past the footprint of the paved area, and make sure that we got a minimal pitch of 1 inch and 8 feet. This is the learning curve with this product, is the excavation, in that you don't have that 6 inches of slop anymore to make up for any inconsistencies of your excavation or any pitch issues. So this is where you gotta have to make up for majority of your pitch. And clean up the grade with the soil rake, and then compact with a plate compactor. And this is something we recommend for clay soils, sandy soils, gravelly soils, not necessarily for topsoil or organics. Once you've compacted the slope, the soil, we're going to lay a non-woven 4.4 ounce Gator fabric with overlapping edges. We want to extend that fabric past the edges of the excavation 12 to 15 inches. And like I said previously, you want to shingle the layers so you have some overlap. You're not just butting the edges up to each other. Now you're going to install your bedding course. So a lot of guys are using pipes and a rail, or pipes as rails. A lot of guys are using 3/4 of an inch of sand. Like I said, all of our edging was done with 1/2 inch sand. So install your bedding course. Once your bedding course is done, you want to fold the extra fabric at the edges back over the bedding course, and then you're going to install the Gator base right on top of that bedding, on the bedding sand. All your pieces are going to have the same orientation. When you look at a piece, there's heads and tails. One side of the piece has the logo in a portrait orientation. The other side has it in a landscape orientation. And when you look at it right side up, each side, the open edges that you want to work off are going to be on your left and the top of the piece. Much like when you're painting a room, you're always working off of a wet edge. With Gator base, you're always working off of the open edges. So you always want to work in a manner so that you're working off the left and the top side of the piece of Gator base. You want to offset the joints much like you would with a running bond patio, and that'll increase the strength of it. There are guys out there that just stack them, but it'll be a stronger unit when you offset the joints. And then once their Gator base is done, you can walk all over it and install your pavers. Pavers are in place. Now you're going to use Gator Edge. Put that up against the pavers as you would typically, and then use Gator Screws, which we make. It's a proprietary tool or a product of ours. It's a corrosion resistant, for lack of a better term, looks like a drywall toggle. You push those down through the Gator base and then use your screw gun to activate the flanges, which will actually permanently attach the edging to the Gator base. Then you're going to put your sand in, consolidate it, and water it as typical. In terms of compatibility, we use Gator base with anything that's going to be consistent in its thickness. So concrete pavers, extruded clay pavers, solder gauge flagstone, porcelain tile, which we make a whole system for porcelain tile. You can use it on concrete slab overlays. You can use it with natural cleft flagstone and wet cast plank. This is going to require a little bit more effort because the natural cleft flagstone, you might have one piece that's 2 1/4 inches on one end and 1 1/8 inches on another. So you do have to make up for some inconsistencies in the thickness of the stone. Wet cast planks can have issues. They can actually have a bow to them. So in this case, you can use another layer of sand on top of the Gator base to get these two products to sit without wobbling. My advice on your first couple projects, I mentioned before, there is a learning curve to this product. So I would start simple, rather basic shapes. Typically, I find contractors, once they get their second project under their belt, you can see the light bulb going over to, okay, we know how to work with this stuff. We can start expanding our repertoire and how we're going to use it. So start simple, start small, maybe 2, 3, 4, 500 square feet. I had a contractor in Nebraska. He put in a 3,500 square foot pool deck, and it was a head scratcher for him. So he did bite off more than he could chew on that first one. But starting simple, start small. I would bump your excavation hours because of the learning curve. Like I said, no longer do you have that 6 inches of slop to make up for any inconsistencies. Now you've got your 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch of sand to make up for inconsistencies. So I would say, bump your excavation hours by 50% on the first couple of projects just to take care of any dicking around that you're going to have to do. And call me. I live in Minneapolis, but you heard my territory. I'm happy to talk to you on the phone. Call me before you get involved with it. We can go over tips and tricks, maybe a little bit more in depth than what I can get here. Or if I can schedule time to come out and meet with you, I'm happy to do that as well. I get a lot of pushback from folks. It's never going to work here. Everyone's skeptical. I saw this stuff 6 years ago in Illinois at the iLandscape show, and I was skeptical. I was a landscape architect, and I walked into the booth, and I scratched my head. Yeah, okay, great, guys, and patted them on the back and was on my way. I've talked to dozens and dozens of contractors that have used this stuff. I have yet to talk to somebody who said this is a horrible idea, I'll never use it again. Everyone said, oh, you need a stone base. Not necessarily. If we're not driving heavy equipment on it, do we need that stone base? With the interlocking edges, we're actually going to transfer weight from piece to piece. And it acts as one big monolithic layer. The University of Montreal did a study on Gator base versus a stone base. And if you go to our website, there's a 26-page report, 28-page report. It's pretty dry, but the conclusion is under dynamic and static loads, this will be equivalent to a stone base, and actually will outperform a stone base when it comes to freeze-thaw cycles. So I mentioned that it transfers weight from piece to piece. So it's basically a big snowshoe underneath your pavers. And I hear the thing, well, we get 5 feet of frost. How's it going to deal with frost? It actually will outperform a stone base when it comes to frost. It has an insulation value. The product, the high density polypropylene, has an insulation value of 3.6. This will allow frost to penetrate the ground, but it'll slow down the depth and it'll slow down the time frame. The beautiful thing about Gator base is that when frost wants to come out of the ground, it's going to regulate the rate at which frost is released. So if you've got a patio where half the area is in the sun, half the area is in the shade, it's going to even everything out. It'll keep the ground insulated and release the frost at a regulated rate so the frost heave really doesn't even exist. Homeowners won't buy it. We got contractors all over the country that would say otherwise. There's over 3.5 million square feet of Gator base installed between the US and Canada. So where's the cost savings? Let's see what we got here. So this is Michael Deuce. This is the guy who puts in 15 to 20 jobs per year. And since I don't have any audio of this, I'm just going to skip over this one. But he figures he saves about $2,000 per job times 20, or he's got 15 jobs. So he's saving $30,000 a year. So he finds it to be a very good product. like I said before, he doesn't use it on every project. It really depends on what his costs are. So he's a guy who knows his costs. So we'll skip through this. So I would ask yourself, are you selling by the square foot? If you're a contractor that is, well, I'm selling paving at 25 bucks a square foot, and that's what I do on every project, maybe this isn't the project or the product for you. You need to have a good handle on what your costs are to see the benefit of this product. When you look at what your excavation costs, so let's drill down a little bit. If you're looking at a pallet of Gator base, that'll cover 651 square feet. If you figure out what that would take in order to excavate it out traditionally, you're saving, for 1 inch of excavation is 2.3 cubic yards. Add another 4 inches of excavation, it's actually 9 cubic yards. So you think about what is all that over excavation costing you on each project. Yeah, and what is the double handling of the spoils cost? So you've excavated out of the patio. Now you have to get all that product out to the curb. Now you got to get all the material from the curb into a truck and get rid of it. You're going to have tipping fees wherever you're going to go. When's the last time you were at a project and you could dump right next door or right at the end of the block? Rarely happens. So all these are all costs that go into the product. You know, what does a stone base cost? So if you're putting 651 square feet in, which is the equivalent of a pallet of this material, which costs about 200 pounds, if you're bringing in 6 inches of stone, you're looking at 24 tons at 10 bucks a ton. So you're looking at $240 just in the material. When you look at a pallet of Gator base, let's say it's $1,800 versus $240. It's easy to say, well, I'm going to do the $240 and not have to spend $1,800, but you have to look into all the other costs that come into play. So the other ones that we went through before. Now you're bringing the stone in. Now you have to bring the stone in from the curb to the backyard. What does that double handling cost you? What does the base installation cost to lay everything down? You lay on the 3-inch layer base or layer, compact it, lay down another 3 inches, compact it. What does all the site restoration cost from the damage that your skid loaders are doing to the yard? You know, at that point, can you afford not to try Gator base? You know, how deep is your labor pool? I had an email this morning actually from a contractor who loved the fact that it was so easy to work with, and his guys loved it, that they could walk all over it. It's a lot easier on your back and easier on your knees. And in today's market for labor, you know, why not make things easier on your people? How does your schedule look? So you saw the video where it came in 57% faster. Now that was hand to hand. I talked to guys that have even looked at excavation, Gator base versus an excavated patio done by a machine. They're still seeing 25 to 35% labor savings when the excavation was done by a machine. So this can speed things up. How can you get more jobs in the ground in the time frame that we have to do that? You look at rain's an impediment. You know, you could lay pavers in a driving rainstorm with this. And you know, technology evolves. This is what I used when I first started landscaping. You know, now everyone's using lasers and zip levels. You know, are we still using optical transits? Maybe we should look at some new technology. Are you still using a brick phone? I got guys using smartphones, but don't want to try Gator base because, well, that's not how you build a patio. Well, you know, technology evolves. Can you afford not to at least try it? You also look at the potential missed opportunity cost. You have easy access. Once the Gator base is down, you can walk all over it. If you're doing a circle patio, you don't have to build a bridge out to the middle and work your way out. You can build the patio and walk right out to the middle and start your paving in the middle. You can stage pavers all over the place. No longer are you having to walk a tightrope trying to not step in the sand in the bedding course. You don't have to worry about going to lunch and worrying about the neighbor's dog running through your bedding course. Like I started to mention before, rain days be kind of a non-issue. You can lay pavers in a driving rainstorm if you want because your bedding course is completely protected. You don't need to wait for it to dry out. You're going to save a lot of fingers and backs. If you're dealing with larger profile pavers and you don't have a vacuum setting device or a pinch setting device, you can actually lay the pavers down and slide them into place and not have to worry about destroying your bedding course or ripping your fingernails off when you pinch them in when you're dropping the pavers next to another paver. Edging and spikes, I mentioned the Gator Screws. So this is our product that you can never have a callback for your edging heaving out of the ground, and I can't name one contractor who doesn't get that phone call. Reduce site damage, right? So you're not having to go back in and resolder reseed someone's yard for all the damage that your machines did. And you get more billing. You're putting in more projects in a given amount of time than you would otherwise. Now, Gator Base does have its limitations. We're using this under pedestrian use only. We're not using it underneath driveways or roadways. I mentioned before, we're not using it in loam or topsoil. So take your shovel out to the project and see what you're dealing with before you get the crew out there. Fill situations, if you're bringing in stone to raise the grade, maybe this doesn't make sense. Although I do have guys that just love the fact that they can walk all over it. So there are guys that do use Gator Base in situations that are pictured here where we're raising the grade because they have full access to the entire paving surface and they can use the Gator Screws to permanently attach the edging to the Gator Base. We're not using it underneath permeable pavers. Even though it has drainage components to it, it does not allow enough water through in a given time period to qualify as permeable. There is a learning curve to it, and the learning curve is the excavation, making sure that your excavation is on point. Cutting in place, if you're a contractor that cuts in place, this might be an issue. You can nick the material. You don't want to cut through the Gator Base. So if you cut in place, I would buy a shoe for your Maniac saw to act as a depth gauge, or mark them, pick them up, cut them, and put them back in place. Like I said, you can nick the material, but you don't want to cut through it. With this, since you're not compacting the pavers into the sand bedding course, you don't need to compact. We're consolidating it at this point. And I had this happen with a vendor last year. We did a demo. I asked a vendor or a contractor to bring his plate compactor with a rubber pad. He showed up with a plate compactor and a piece of carpeting. What happened is that without the rubber pad to absorb the shock, the pavers were actually lifting up off the Gator Base, and the sand, the polymeric sand, was getting underneath. So if you're going to use a plate compactor, a rubber pad for sure, and at a low RPM or low throttle, just enough to get it to move, or consider using the paver rolling compactor. I don't have a fancy graphic for this, but I have seen it on really hot, sunny days. The product can expand. It'll thermally expand. It can cup a little bit. And if it does cup, it can become dislodged from adjoining pieces. So what I would do in really hot, sunny locations, if you're putting in a larger patio, maybe put a third or a quarter of the Gator Base down and then pave that area. Then put so do another 25%, pave that area, do another 25%, pave that area, just so you don't have issues with the material cupping. And a backslide. A lot of guys that try it, and they backslide into putting in patios the normal way. This is never going to take the place of a stone base completely, but it's a nice tool to have in your back pocket. And I run into contractors all the time. Oh, we tried Gator Base 2 years ago. I kind of forgot about that. So there is a backslide with some guys that they just forget about using it. Is it a horrible idea? I mentioned before, I have yet to talk to someone who tried it and said it's a horrible idea. This is a horrible idea. 2 guys in a zebra outfit, horrible idea. Dill pickle ice toothpaste, horrible idea. Everybody that I've talked to said is a good idea. It has a learning curve to it, but we like it, and we're looking for other places to work it into our projects. I'll leave you with this. You can't do today's job with yesterday's methods and still expect to be in business tomorrow. So with that, we'll take any questions. Mike, if you want to fire up, and do you have anybody that submitted anything?
No, we do not have anybody that submitted anything, but I appreciate your time. And if anybody has any questions, they can contact Keith, or they can contact a Tessman rep at one of our 3 locations. I appreciate your time today, Keith.
My pleasure. I'm sorry I went long. I tried to talk as fast as I could. If you have any questions, I'll give you my phone number is 262-339-6981. Or you can email me at Keith, Keith, .EHMKE@alliancegator.com. And I tell guys too, take a look at our website. We've got case studies on Gator Base there, and there's also a lot of really good educational components at our website.
All right, great, Keith. I'll talk to you later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike.